Night had fallen on the city, once lively, now steeped in dead silence. Darkness no longer brought peace, as it once did. Now it concealed dangers that hunted anyone still alive. Emily sat by the window, watching the half-destroyed buildings disappear into the thick fog. Distant groans echoed through the empty streets. Her heart tightened with fear, but she clung to hope. Her husband, Michael, sat beside her, checking his backpack. A few bottles of water, some cans of food, and a weapon he found a week ago. The unknown disease, dubbed the Darkness, had changed everything. It spread at lightning speed, infecting people all over the world. What started as an ordinary cough turned into uncontrollable horror. Within days, the infected lost consciousness, their skin grew pale, and they rose again, no longer human. They became hunters, driven by only one goal: to devour all living things. The first weeks were chaotic. Governments collapsed, cities turned into ruins, and civilization vanished under a wave of fear and panic. Emily and Michael survived by a miracle. They saw their small world crumble, their friends and family one by one turn into monsters. At first, they tried to save their family, but it was futile. The infected were too strong and too numerous. When their last refuge in the city center was destroyed, they left everything behind and ran. Since then, every day was a battle for survival. "We have to go," Michael whispered, looking at his wife. "They'll find us soon, like they've found everyone else." Emily nodded, feeling the cold seep through her body. It was hard for her to leave this place, even though they had been here only a few days. But she knew they had no choice. The infected could sense people from afar and could reach them at any moment. There was no time to hesitate. They silently gathered their things and slipped out of the building, careful not to make any unnecessary noise. Every sound could betray them. Michael walked ahead, keeping the weapon at the ready. Emily clutched a knife that had saved her life more than once. The streets were empty, but danger hung in the air. Every step was cautious, almost silent. Their goal: to leave the city and find shelter in the forests, where they hoped it would be safer. On the other side of the city, in one of the abandoned neighborhoods, two other survivors, Alex and Sarah, were also trying to escape. They had been hiding in the basement of a supermarket for days, thinking it was a safe haven. But the lack of water and food forced them to search for a way out. Alex stood guard at the entrance, peering into the darkness. His hands trembled with tension, and he no longer felt his body. Sarah stood nearby, silent, her face pale. She hadn't slept for 3 nights. "We can't stay here," she whispered, breaking the silence. Her voice was weak, but there was determination in it. "We need to find water." Alex nodded, but kept his eyes glued to the door. They had heard noises outside for the past few hours. It could be the infected or it could be people, but they didn't dare check. "I'll go first," he finally said, stepping away from the door. His voice was steady, but inside, panic swirled. "You stay here until I make sure it's clear." Sarah nodded, unable to hold back her tears. She felt like this world had lost all meaning. She wanted to scream, wanted it all to stop, but she knew it was useless. Alex opened the door and stepped out into the dark streets. His steps were careful, almost silent. He knew that any wrong move could trigger another wave of terror. He walked a few meters when he heard a faint sound, some rustling in the distance. Alex froze, gripping a metal rod he had found. He squinted into the darkness but saw nothing. Then suddenly, something huge lunged out of the shadows. His heart stopped for a moment, but he managed to react in time. The rod cut through the air, knocking the creature to the ground. But the danger wasn't over. Behind the first infected, more appeared, their moaning filling the streets. Alex turned and ran, but it was too late. There were too many of them. Emily and Michael continued their journey through the city. Their shadows slipped between the buildings, avoiding direct encounters with the infected. Suddenly, they heard screams ahead. Emily stopped, straining to see through the darkness. "Someone else is out there," she whispered, hoping there were other survivors. Michael came closer, his face serious. "We can't help them," he said firmly, though his breath was heavy. "We have to think about ourselves." Emily knew he was right, but the thought of others dying somewhere in the darkness made her heart ache. She couldn't take it anymore. "We have to at least check," she insisted. "Maybe there's someone we can save." Michael stood silently for a few seconds, weighing her words. They stood on a narrow street, shrouded in fog and moonlight. In the distance, the screams continued. "All right," he finally agreed, pulling out his weapon. "But we'll be careful." They moved toward the source of the screams, cautiously scanning every corner. The street was littered with debris and the remnants of lives lost. The bodies of the fallen were gone, but the fear they left behind remained. Eventually, they reached a crumbling building. On the floor lay Alex, his body battered after a struggle. The infected moved around him, unaware of the approaching survivors. Emily shuddered at the sight of the aftermath of the fight. "We're too late," Michael whispered, pulling Emily back as they tried to avoid attracting attention. Sarah, hidden behind one of the collapsed walls, could not believe Alex was gone. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes filled with fear and tears. She realized she was now completely alone. The horrifying reality washed over her like a wave of despair, but she couldn't stay still. The infected were already closing in on her hiding spot. She saw Emily and Michael quietly retreating from the scene. Summoning her last strength, she stepped forward. "Help me," she whispered, trying to suppress her panic. Michael raised his weapon, eyeing her cautiously. He didn't know if she was infected or not. Doubt filled his mind as he realized he couldn't trust anyone in this world anymore. "Are you alone?" he asked coldly. "Yes," she whispered, swallowing her tears. He's gone." Emily stepped closer, looking for any signs of infection. Sarah was exhausted, but there were no visible bites. She was clean. "We have to help her," Emily said firmly. "She's not infected." Michael considered the risks once more, then nodded. He could only hope it was the right choice. "Fine, but stay close to us," he ordered, signaling Sarah to join them. They continued on, leaving the ruined city behind, now sinking into the darkness and death. Their path led them to the forest, where they hoped to find shelter and a moment of peace. As they approached the outskirts of the city, the fog thickened, and the sounds of the infected faded into the distance. Emily led the way, carefully examining every bush and tree. Sarah followed behind, still shaken but determined to survive. Michael stayed at the rear, guarding their backs. Suddenly, through the dense fog, they saw a small group of people gathered around a campfire. Their faces were tired, but alive. The group included men, women, and even 2 children. "Who are you?" one of the men asked, standing up and holding a makeshift weapon. Michael stepped forward, keeping his own weapon lowered to show he wasn't a threat. "We're not infected. We're just looking for shelter." One of the men approached, scrutinizing them. "We're trying to survive too, but you can't trust anyone anymore." Emily approached him, her hands visible to avoid suspicion. "We lost everyone. We just want to join you. We can help." The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We've been hiding here for days. The forest is safe for now, but we don't know how long that will last. We could use any help we can get." They joined the group, sitting by the fire. Sarah, still overwhelmed, began to relax in the presence of others. The children sat quietly next to their parents, their eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. The next morning, they set out together. The forest was dense, and they were surrounded by dead silence. They moved quickly, trying to avoid unnecessary attention. Michael stayed at the back, keeping his gun at the ready, prepared for any attack. After a few hours of walking, They reached an abandoned bunker. It looked old and neglected, but it was their only hope of survival. The entrance was blocked by debris, and it took them some time to clear it. Inside, it was dark, but dry. The group slowly entered, inspecting the space. They weren't sure if anyone else was there, but a sense of safety gradually began to return. "We made it," Emily whispered, squeezing Michael's hand. Her eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. But suddenly, footsteps echoed from deep within the bunker. "Someone else is here," said the man with the rifle, raising his weapon. They cautiously approached the source of the sound, and soon several people in military uniforms appeared before them. Their faces were exhausted, but they looked calm. "Who are you?" one of the soldiers asked. "We're survivors," Michael replied, "and we're looking for shelter." The soldier looked at them and nodded. "Then you've come to the right place. We've been holding this bunker for a few weeks now. It's safe here." The group breathed a sigh of relief. They had found what they had been searching for so long, shelter in a world that had long forgotten peace.